we'll get started with our next session. We have Kelsey Deckert here with us today, who I happen to be married to too, so it kind of worked out good. But she's the horticulture agent for Burley and Morton County with NDSU Extension, and today she'll talk about raised bed gardening.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to speak to you guys today. I like to be very interactive with my presentation, so if you have questions, don't hesitate to put up a hand right away. You don't need to wait till the end. Please feel free to talk and have some discussion with me. I feel like when you give a presentation, your discussions are really the meat of the presentation. So, like Jaden said, I'm here to talk to you about raised bed gardening, which kind of is ironic at this time of the year since we're wrapping up the growing season, but maybe it's something that will give you guys an idea of something to do over the winter, kill some of those winter blues. Anybody in here have a raised bed? Just raise your hand. Okay, a few of us, great. So those of you that raised your hand, anybody give me a definition or how you define what raised bed gardening is?
Something lifted off the ground.
Anything above the ground, lifted off the ground? Yeah. So if the average person went and did a Google search, this is what Wikipedia would tell you, is that it's a form of gardening in which the soil is raised above the ground level and usually enclosed in some way. Our neighboring state, Minnesota Extension, defines it as raised bed gardening is a simple technique that can improve the health and productivity of your garden. So a lot of times if you are looking out on Extension websites, they're going to talk about the ways that you can actually improve your soil structure with it. So some advantages. You can have better drainage with it. That is going to be very hard for you to see, so I'll read it off. The soil can be better because basically you can control the soil structure within your raised bed. You have higher yields, which is going to be due to the better root growth that you'll see due to that soil, and you can also maximize the space in a raised bed. You can expand your growing season, and so what is nice about a raised bed is in the spring, they warm up quicker and they dry out faster from that snow that we would have. They're easy maintenance, less labor intensive, and again, by maximizing the space, you can actually shade out some of those pesky weeds. Provides more gardening opportunities, and with that, I mean, if you have like a difficult or a smaller site, it's an opportunity for those. Disadvantages. The elevated beds do tend out to dry out more quickly in the summer, especially when we're on days like today that it's very hot, so you will have to water more. But one way that you can easily combat that is by adding mulch to your garden. The frame and soil materials can be an added expense. There is limited crop rotation because of the space. And then you also have increased plant density, which does create problems for pests. So if you have a fungus, it's easily spread. If you have insects, probably going to be contained within that bed. And then it's not well suited for large plants like watermelon, squash, a lot of those larger ones that are going to vine out. So what do raised beds look like? I'm going to go through just kind of a series of photos. Raised beds look just different in everybody's own situation. One thing I like to note about this photo right here is, one thing I've heard is out in Ward County with some of their community gardens, they've actually implemented raised beds to give opportunities for those who have disabilities to actually be able to go out and use a community garden. You can use containers. Containers are considered a raised bed. You can upcycle older materials, and you can use traditional containers. So what type would you choose? These are just some questions that I think you need to ask yourself. You know, why do you want to have raised beds? What kind of space do you have for them? You know, what do you want to grow, and how much do you actually want to invest in them? Again, all things to consider before you go ahead and get a raised bed going. So kind of jumping into the container area, great thing about container gardening, any gardener, any age, any experience can do this. I would say most of you again, show of hands, probably have had a container garden of some sort, whether it's for flowers or even just vegetables. These are going to be essentially weed-free because in a container garden, I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but we actually would recommend to use a commercial soil type. So that's going to be sterile, very easily manageable, and then it's going to be perfect for limited space or, again, if you have a physical disability. When we look across the state, especially here in Bismarck-Mandan, we see a lot of more urbanization going on. So there's a lot of apartment settings that go up. Well, if you have a balcony, containers are going to be perfect for that. Or if you have essentially no yard in the back. Another thing that has been popular trends over the past few years is actually doing like a themed garden. So with my position and stuff, I've done a lot with succulent gardening. It's really nice with kids to do like a salsa themed pizza. Of course, every kid goes crazy over that. And even fairy gardens have something that has been on the trend, but kind of going on the downspout. So I've implemented this in some of my junior master gardener programs, again, doing a theme, and it really helps bridge that gap with the youth that are unaware of where their food actually comes from. So again, just showing you how you can use other things for a raised bed and actually create like a focal point within your yard. You can upcycle materials. The biggest thing about upcycling materials is the fact that you do have to be careful of like if there'd be any chemicals that were in those containers, and you also need to provide drainage. So if a shoe or something you're going to use, you need to make sure to go get a drill and actually provide those holes so it does have drainage in it. So soil, like I said, if we are looking at a container garden, again, purchase a commercial mix. It's going to be lighter, it's going to be sterile, it's going to provide better drainage. If you were to go and get a container and just fill it with garden soil, it might last you a season or two, but what's going to happen is it's going to get really compacted, it's going to be heavy, it's not going to provide those nutrients that you're going to need for it. Like I said, watering is something that you're going to have to do on a more regular basis and more frequent than an in-ground garden. So sometimes, depending on if it's a container, you might have to be out there daily. You'll want to make sure that you're feeling the actual soil, see if it's moist a couple inches down. If it's got some moisture in it, leave it be for another day or two. If it's feeling like it's actually moist, skip it. That would be the easiest way to tell. As far as fertilizing, again, if you're putting it in an actual container, you're going to want to fertilize with like a liquid soluble at half the recommended rate to start and then adjust as the season progresses. If you do have more of a raised bed that's like got a wood frame and everything, you can fertilize those just like you would a traditional garden. So constructing your own. There is raised ground beds. I didn't have a picture of this, and again, I apologize. It looks a lot better on my screen than what it does on yours, but this is going to be your simplest form. And so basically, it's just mounding soil right directly on top of the ground. There's going to be no materials needed except that additional soil to get started. You can have a supported raised bed. That's going to be using a raised ground bed method by adding a frame, whether that's stone, wood, brick, or even plastic. And then a containerized. A lot of times when we look at these, they're going to have like a blueprint and a form to follow. So I know there's a lot of high school FFA programs and agricultural classes that do build raised beds out there. So they have a lot of nice blueprints to use, especially for teaching students. So like I said, we kind of talked a little bit about materials you can use. It is recommended to use pressurized treated lumber. There's a misconception out there that it's toxic, you shouldn't use that. You know, I've worked with some of the specialists here at NDSU, and I always chuckle because we had a conversation about this one day, and he said, people who are worried about the toxicity, don't you think the plant would die first before we would die? So just a good point, as there has been such bad press about treated lumber, the companies have actually taken out like the arsenic in there, and they've just added a super concentrated amount of copper in there. So this is a non-toxic option. If you do have a more expensive taste or you have the affordability, you can look at getting like that oak, redwood, cedar. Even if you wanted to do like a tin, plastic, like I said, stone, brick, some of those other ones, but you do want to avoid the railroad ties. Unless you're going to do like a flower bed, then it would be okay. So some tips. When you are building it, you may want to line the bottom of it or the whole inside with landscaping fabric. Again, if you're going to put it directly on the ground, you can essentially get weeds that would come up from that. So it's a good practice to have. Avoid plastic. Again, plastic's going to harbor some of that moisture and it can allow some of that root rot to go on. So the soil mixture comprising of like a soil and organic matter, there's some suggestions out there would be like a 70% soil to a 30% compost. The biggest, I guess, concern that we have locally and stuff would be using the landfill compost. I get a lot of people who incorporate that in their gardens, and they take everything from lawn clippings from companies, they don't know what's in it, and you end up seeing herbicide injury. And that can take several years to actually get out of your garden. So make sure it's coming from a reliable source or even yourself composting it. And then you'll probably want to make sure to add 2 to 4 inches of soil each year because that soil is going to settle over time. But like I said, this is one of the best things about a raised bed is you actually are constructing the soil structure that you have going on with it. Square foot gardening, this is one thing that's really great to incorporate on a raised bed. I've done this a few different times, again with some different youth groups and stuff. It's another way to maximize limited space and maximize the amount of plants you can put in there. Anybody familiar with square foot gardening? Do you do it?
Yes.
Okay. How do you do it? Like, I mean, do you find it very successful?
I built like a 4x2 planter to put on my deck that I put herbs in.
Okay.
And it works very, very well.
Okay.
Right out the front door.
Just herbs then?
Yeah, that's what I've done so far. It's going here cheap with it.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, it's a really easy way. A lot of people, like again, I said, if you have limited space, it's an easy way to incorporate. I like using this with children just because they can see how many plants you can actually fit in there. So I have a couple photos coming up just in some past that I've done with it. And the other thing about square foot gardening is there'd be no tilling involved in it. So again, kind of same things as raised bed gardening. You're going to maximize your space. It's going to be less labor intensive. It's a very simple setup, less weeding, easy watering, no tilling, and then the crop rotation is simply achieved by moving each square each year, your plants into a new square. So again, here's like a nice permanent, let me find my laser, permanent one that you can set up. Very easy. Is yours permanent? Like okay. Okay, perfect. You can use string and just measure out that 1 square foot. I've seen people, I have one coming up too where they've actually used wood to lay down. I did this one quite a few years ago now, probably 8 years ago. We had a Junior Master Gardener program out in Wing, North Dakota, and these youth just had a really large garden area, but I still wanted to teach them the concept of it. So we decided to do stakes. The problem with that is North Dakota wind really at the end of the season kind of took care of that for us. But yes. Is the goal 1 plant then per square foot? I got that coming up. Oh. Okay.
See, I've always been ahead of the curve.
Yeah, that's okay. So you can see, like I said, probably 7, 8 years ago, as the year went on, that string really fell apart. So it wasn't very successful with the in-ground garden with string, but I did do this in Wilton as well, and we did more of a permanent structure on raised beds where it was easy to teach them. So again, looking at more of a permanent structure, you can see kind of the progression of these different plants as the season goes on there. And so right here, Daryl just kind of talking to you for you guys who can see this. Small plants, which would include radish, carrots, onions, you can get about 16 in a square foot. If you're looking at what we just consider small, not extra small, a bush bean, beet, spinach, 9 plants. When you get into the medium plants, so lettuce, basil, marigold, corn, parsley, potato, strawberry, turnip, you can get about 4 into a square foot. I personally don't think that corn should be in that category. I think it's more of a large plants, but you can get tomato, eggplant, broccoli, cabbage, cucumber, cauliflower, okra, and pepper, 1 per square foot. And this, I always tell people, you might as well disregard this. I've never seen somebody be able to contain a vining plant to 2 square feet, but the gentleman who came up with this concept, this is kind of the guidelines that he provided. The nice thing about square foot gardening, if it is something you want to incorporate with youth, I've always started before we actually get out into the garden. If you buy paper towels, they're about 1 square foot. And so we will go ahead and we basically create seed tape with the youth prior, and we'll glue out that many seeds and space them. And then you can put them right in the garden. So just a way for them to see that concept and see how you can actually implement it and all the seeds you can fit on 1 square foot. Photo credits, Pixabay. Do you guys have any additional questions? Anybody want to share, like you said you had a square foot or a raised bed. What do you like about your raised bed?
Well, actually, so the reason I built it is my in-laws have a cabin, and the ground there's rock. So I built up on top of the hill, built a raised garden, and then it was a 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot, so a U shape.
Mm-hmm.
Then I took some tires and I put 9 tires out there and did that in a U shape, and then I do the potatoes on the ground with straw. I did this year, I think they did pumpkins in the tires. Before we did tomatoes in the tires, and then the U shape I have the normal garden. We actually tried to move some other stuff over there. Really good, you know, it's for the cabin kind of usage and stuff like that. I did build a deer fence around it so the deer don't get into it, but I will notice I don't have water there, so I have a tank that I bring out there. It does dry up very fast.
Yeah.
You lose your garden faster than you would a normal garden, but last year I had those potatoes in the tires, and I did go steal some of the terrible soil that blew off the people's fields, so I probably had maybe some chemicals I shouldn't have had, but the texture wasn't the best soil, but it had a lot of nutrients in there for my garden, so it was kind of like the fertilizer that it needed. But I'm trying raspberries in it to see if that'll go. I planted some raspberries, and then I have one other one that has strawberries right now in it too. So.
Are you doing those in the tires or in the...
No, those are in a raised one. I got them about 3 feet off the ground, I think. I thought about planting raspberries, but I really didn't want them to start going everywhere, so I thought if I tried them in the raised garden, we'll see how they go.
If you can contain them a little bit.
I got them started last year. They didn't produce anything this year, but they're all
new.
They're all about 1.5 foot tall right now, so I think by next year I should have some raspberries growing. But.
So it was a way to actually be able to garden on an unfit site. Perfect. Anybody else want to share? Go ahead.
We use old lick tubs that
Yep.
the plastic ones at the bottoms eventually will crack, and we put our spicy peppers in it so that we can control the watering so they get hotter than normal if we have them in with the rest, and then we know these are the spicy ones. Don't get them mixed up with the rest of the peppers in the regular garden.
Yep, and I've done it similar to the lick tubs, but like the plastic round totes. I've done that with potatoes at schools and stuff. So literally I've cut out the bottom of it and then just put a layer of fabric and we fill it with soil and put the potatoes in there. So it's a good way. Anybody else want to share? Go ahead.
This year I ended up doing a cut garden instead of a vegetable garden, and I put flowers into my 2 4x8 raised beds, and they're the best flowers I've ever grown in my life. They've just done phenomenal this year, but I have terrible soil in my yard in general, so everything that went into the ground just stuns. So it was very nice this year.
What do you use for your soil then in the beds?
I did a mix of a few different things. I do some home composting.
Yep.
And then I just did baked soil, and I put tree branches
Right.
And it has settled quite a bit, but the soil quality is very, very nice. And then, I don't disturb it besides putting my plants into the ground. I don't, turn it over or anything. And then I mulch it with grass clippings from my yard.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Anybody else? So I can just share my experience. Luckily enough, I asked my husband for Mother's Day for some raised beds, and he built them. And I will say our raised beds at home, I definitely follow the guidelines of like watering a garden once a week. And even though, again, it's a raised bed, I've pretty much stuck through that this summer, and I have not had any issues with like extreme drying out or the soil. I just do a really deep, thorough watering, and I don't do it very frequent, just probably once a week. So it's been a really good thing, and I've liked it. I do find it way more easier to manage, especially with 2 little girls running around and everything. So again, it's something to consider if you feel like your garden's out of hand, or if maybe as you are getting older, you start to feel some of those pains that we get with aging and stuff, but it's a really good concept. So any other questions that I can entertain for you guys? Yes.
So the beds that are just off of the ground, or I should say they're right on the ground, but they're built up, do you put a layer of, like she was saying, like logs and rocks and things like that to kind of fill them up a little bit? And if so, like how high would you put that compared to your soil above it?
You don't have to. Depends on how deep you're going to make your bed and what you're going to grow in it. Like, are you going to do more root vegetables? Like with our beds at home, what are they, Jane? 10-inch boards used? Yeah, and so we just literally put them on the ground. I didn't put any fabric or anything on them and just filled them up. So, I would say you see that more people wanting to do that with like those large decorative containers and stuff. I don't know, if you're using a commercial soil, I don't see the need to have to layer them up.
Mine are about 20 inches tall.
Okay.
I put mine a little taller because I just didn't want to.
Bend over and stuff, yeah, yeah. Totally get that.
Why is it you don't use railroad ties?
Well, railroad ties do have like chemical and can leach and stuff. I don't know all the chemicals that are in them compared to like a treated pressurized wood that they used to do, but they have different chemicals that you would definitely avoid on there because there could be some toxicity on it. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys. I just wanted to show you real quick. I don't know if you want to just pop that door open. We actually have a program going on later this week that we're giving away some raised beds. So if you guys want to just check them out here, you can take a look at some ideas on different raised beds to incorporate.